Genevieve is a 1953 released British comedy directed by Henry Cornelius.
Yeah, two car enthusiasts and their other halves take part in the London to Brighton veteran car run. Due to car and love rivalry, they decide to wager on who's going to make it back to London first. But that's easier said than done when the cars consistently break down and they play dirty tricks on each other to try and to get ahead. And 50s hilarity ensues.
So this one was one that my mum showed me and my brothers quite a lot when we were younger, but I seem to remember being shown it around Christmas. It's kind of one of those, it's a family film, it's a family comedy. I hadn't seen it now for, I don't know, 30 years? I haven't seen it in my adult life, that's for sure. I've seen it in my, when I was a child. And so I thought we'd give it a go for this. It's very innocent, although maybe not. It's quite weird, actually. It's a sweet kind of British... Genteel, exactly, film from the early 1950s with a really good cast. If you know British cinema from that period, then you'll recognise most of the faces, especially of the main cast and a couple of others here and there as well. But it's kind of a sweet, light-hearted romp through the British English countryside. From London to Brighton, which is itself based on. It is just a real thing.
Yeah,
I mean that's what
still goes on now. Yeah,
still goes on now. It's if you are from America, well, hopefully you know where London is. It's in the south, and Brighton is even further south than that.
It's about 50 odd miles.
About 50
from
miles.
London to Brighton.
It goes down through the South Downs, and it's a beautiful run actually from London to Brighton. Probably not quite as picturesque as it was in the 1950s. I mean that's what's probably most interesting about these films is. If you are, and I'm sure, fans of movies from the countries that they live in, it's interesting watching these old films because you get to see in here you get to see a Britain that doesn't really exist as much anymore.
No.
Hardly any motorways. I mean, there's not many motorways that go down from London to Brighton.
No.
But obviously you've got there are bigger roads that exist now that didn't exist in this time. So it's kind of interesting from that point of view. Looking at all the older... I mean, obviously, these two cars are much older than what's on the road at that time. But even, seeing old cars on the roads and the way people dress, in those days in England, you very much remember, businessmen, they all wore these kind of the black pinstripe suit and the black bowler hat and... walked with I know that's maybe a bit cliche because that's what kind of came up in a lot of films and TV at the time, but I think that's what it was like.
And everybody talks like this and calls each other old boy.
Old boy, and yes, everyone speaks like the Queen, which of course wasn't.
No regional accents. Unless you're working class, and then you might be allowed to have regional accents.
There's one guy in there who I think is supposed to have a bit of a regional accent in there. Of course, that's exactly what it was like in the 1950s in this country and everywhere else in the world. Well, what did you'd never seen it before?
I hadn't seen it. I don't know if I even heard of it, to be honest. I mean, apparently it was on, they used to show it on on TV Sunday afternoons quite often. I can't remember ever watching it, but no, it was okay. I mean, it's a very sort of gentle, inoffensive, well, mostly inoffensive film that just sort of pootles along with about as slow as the cars do, and I started to think if Kenneth Moore calls somebody old boy one more time, I'm gonna scream, and if a car breaks down one more time, I'm gonna scream even more. But no, it was fine. It was enjoyable enough. Lots of fun performances and some wacky characters. Not one I'd rush to watch again.
What I do like about it, however, is it's got that. I mean, it's not at that time, Ealing were British film studios that made a lot of these kind of comedies, where this isn't. But it does similar things in there that some of those Ealing films used to do, which is where there are a lot of quite interesting sound effects. You hear like at one point they go into this. They can't stay at the hotel they're supposed to stay at, so they have to go to this kind of run-down hotel. And they've been warned that it's basically they can't go to the nice posh one up the road. They've got to go to this kind of cheaper one, and the wallpaper's kind of coming off the walls. And they've been warned that this the person that had it before there's a problem with noise, and the person that had it before was deaf, so she of course couldn't hear anything. He opens the window and there's a clock out there, and you know exactly what's going to happen. And then of course the clock turns to midnight, and it starts chiming, and it's like really loud. But it's kind of I think a lot of these old British films they had quite fun with sound effects. and really playing on that, which I enjoyed. And of course, the cars themselves make like kind of weird sounds as they're trundling down the road or breaking down on the side of the road,
or backfiring in a very
backfiring.
cliched way.
Yeah, and there's a bit with a sink where something like gurgles in the sink as well. So there's lots of these kind of I suppose sound gags, sight gags, sound gags, if you will. Yeah, I enjoyed it again, I have to say.
I mean, I was a bit confused how... so you've got John Gregson, who plays Alan McKim, who owns Genevieve, which is a Dirac, I think I'm saying that right, from 1904, I think.
Yeah.
And, we see him at the start of leaving work, and he's a barrister. But they seem to be quite poor, him and his wife. They talk about how much money they've got in the bank.
Yeah.
And, so, I mean, obviously, certainly appear to be middle class. He can afford to have this vintage car and keep it running, but
and live down, is it like the Mews?
Yeah.
Those very nice, expensive parts of London.
Well, it's probably gentrified now, isn't it? So
probably
now it is expensive,
Yeah.
but back then, who knows? But yeah, so I was a bit confused. Why are they so poor? And when he makes this, so they make a wager on who's for £100, which in the 50s was a lot of money.
But they're like,
that's almost all their savings.
All their savings. Yeah, exactly.
So I was like, how much do you earn as a barrister? Then obviously not very much. I thought it was reasonably well paid. I suppose you have, they don't want him to be a working class. So he has to have some sort of
have some kind
middle class job.
Yeah, exactly.
But then there's got to be some sort of reason why this way, he needs to win the race in order to, so he doesn't lose all his money. So I don't know.
It's like the original petrol head movie, isn't it?
Yes.
Because they are, literally blokes in cars, They want to spend more time in their cars really than they want to do, spend time with their wives or girlfriends. They're tinkering away on their cars, they're racing. There's a line in there that one of them says. She says, "I don't know what it is about these silly old cars. The moment people get into them, they start behaving like idiots," which is exactly what people do now.
Yes.
They jump in their souped up cars, their boy racers and all that, and they race up and down the road and get into trouble and have the police on their back all the time. And so it's interesting how things haven't really changed. 70 years later, things are still pretty much the same, and boys will be boys, as they say. It's got some. It was written by an American who lived over here, William Rose, who's actually he wrote The Lady Killers and It's a Mad World. The Russians are coming, and guess who's coming to dinner? So he had a big backtrack of a lot of those films are after this one, but clearly a very well thought after writer. There's lots of nice lines here. And I think it's one of those films that's quite interesting watching it through eyes from 2022. How things have changed so much, really. You could watch this maybe in the 1980s and still feel, because we're now at that point where we're getting less. We're connected to the 50s because we have our grandparents were around it, and we remember. But there are kids now growing up that have less and less connection to those times.
Yeah.
So I think it's kind of interesting watching these films through 2022 eyes. But it is what it is. It's very gentle. If you're a fan of those kind of cars, it's got them in. What was the other one? A Spiker.
Spiker, yeah, from 1905, yeah. So at the time, they were 50-year-old cars.
Themselves,
now they're 120-year-old cars. It was, it's filmed on location for a lot of it. And, the driving... even in the 50s, they would use sort of back projection and things like that, but they tried not to do that. Instead, sort of mounted the cars on flatbed trucks and things like that.
Yes, because John Gregson couldn't drive.
No, that's true, he couldn't drive. So, which was interesting. So nobody bothered to ask him before they started filming. Yeah, so they filmed in, you can see they're actually in London when they film, and they're actually in Brighton. But in between, because I was, we're not far away from the sort of route, some of the roads that the London to Brighton takes. But I was like, maybe I'll see something I recognise. But that I didn't, because they didn't film any of the sort of in between anywhere near there. It was all filmed with a sort of radius around Pinewood.
Right, okay.
So, I guess one English countryside lane looks much the same as
those
another.
days, they all look the same.
They pass a few pubs and things like that, which obviously at the time, would have been recognisable. Whether any of them are still there, who knows?
Yeah, that's interesting, because I too, when I was watching it, I was like, because if you go from London to Brighton, you come very close to where we are, where we live in the country. But yeah, I was like, don't
recognise
and maybe
it.
a pub. I mean, obviously pubs change, but the buildings stay the same. You know, there are a lot of buildings down here that exist now that existed in those times, and you possibly could pick things out. But no, that's interesting. I didn't realise that. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting looking at Brighton, because Brighton's obviously changed a huge amount over the last 70 years.
Yeah. Although they show a roundabout that they come to, and I immediately recognize there's a building that you can see, and that's still there today. I recognise it straight away, and obviously the pier, which is still there. Although, there was one that burnt down, so maybe they're not far apart, particularly the piers. So it's either the one that that's a shell, or it's the one that's currently there. I'm not sure, but no, Brighton seafront's definitely recognisable. It doesn't, yes, the shop fronts and stuff change, but the buildings and
the sea doesn't change.
No, exactly. No.
Still as cold as it ever is.
Yeah, still a pebbly beach.
So you picked this up on DVD?
I did, yeah. It's not hard to find. Pretty cheap.
I think my mum's got that one.
Oh, there you go then. So this is the special edition by ITV DVD, digitally remastered, although it didn't look particularly amazing. It's got a profile of Genevieve documentary, which wasn't bad actually. I think it was about 25 minutes or so, I think, and it had interviews with Dinah Sheridan and because I think all the other cast by then were dead. I think John Gregson died quite young, as did Kenneth Moore. Well, no, that's wrong. No, sorry, they died in their 60s.
Yeah, and even
it was Kay Kendall who...
She died, she was 32.
Yeah. So I think she had leukemia. So she died late, end of the 50s, I think.
Well, she was famously married to Rex Harrison, and I think I was reading that she didn't know she had leukemia, and they decided to keep it from her. But so she was very young.
Yeah, she was, sad. But yeah, there's interviews with some of the crew. Yeah, but I think even that was made, the end, I think it was 99. So even that, Dinah Sheridan has since passed away quite a few years ago. So, but at the time, it talks about the cars, and I think they're both the cars are, somewhere in Europe. And they still drive them.
Okay.
So every so often, they looked in better condition than they did in the film. So they've been, lovingly restored. No backfires or anything.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there was, it's been released on Blu-ray in the States and Spain. But, quite why it hasn't in the UK when it is, obviously a British film and won a BAFTA. Couldn't be much more British, apart from obviously being written by an American.
I mean, the soundtrack is this is kind of a harmonica soundtrack by a musician named Larry Adler, who I think he either he won an Oscar, he was nominated for an Oscar, and he got he made a lot of money off the back of this soundtrack, and it's a very noticeable soundtrack. It's kind of, I think it's become quite an iconic soundtrack. Although he was taken off the credits in America because he was blacklisted.
I was about to say that. Yeah, I think the soundtrack was nominated, but his name wasn't.
That's right. Yeah,
connected to it.
Yeah.
Because of that. Yeah.
I mean, it's got a great. I mean, its soundtrack is it's a very memorable soundtrack. It's very uplifting and bright and bubbly and quite fun. It's quite comical soundtrack, I think, that harmonica sound. But there's other bits. I mean, there is a scene in there where Kay Kendall herself, she kind of gets up on stage and starts playing the trumpet.
Yes.
Which you don't know, everyone thinks she's going to be terrible because she's drunk as well at this point.
Yeah.
And she gets up on the stage and she just kind of jumps into this amazing scene, which is...
comes out of nowhere, doesn't it?
Comes out of nowhere, yeah, although it was Kenny Baker who played the actual music in it. But I think it's things like that kind of make the film quite warm and bubbly and just a gentle, warm-hearted film. So that was Genevieve, and as always, if you enjoyed the video, let us know in the comments below.
Hit the subscribe button up there and don't forget to push the bell for notifications. There's other videos to check out over there. Come and find us on social media and join us again soon for another video.